Settle down, class. Settle. Down. Professor Vorx's voice boomed through the lecture hall as his third and fourth arms simultaneously adjusted his hover belt and straightened his academic sash. His skin rippled from frustrated purple to a more composed blue-green. I said quiet, or I'll have each of you write a 10-page dissertation on Earth's most boring geological feature, Nebraska. The amphitheater of alien students gradually hushed. Some folded extra appendages, while others retracted eye stalks. A gelatinous blob in the back row solidified slightly out of respect. Thank you, Professor Vorx sighed, his nostril flaps relaxing. Now, as I was saying before, I was so rudely interrupted by whatever Gloop Triskelion thinks passes for humor in the Crab Nebula. He glared at a three-headed student who was still quietly snickering. We'll be continuing our survey of primitive backwater planets. Why nobody visits them with our next case study Earth. A collective groan rippled through the classroom. Oh, come on. Vorx's skin flashed irritably. Earth isn't that bad. Sure, it's populated by bipedal mammals who took an embarrassingly long time to figure out that washing hands prevents disease, but they're quaint. Lixner, a spindly insectoid student in the front row, raised a chitinous limb. Professor, didn't we already cover Earth last semester in planets that almost destroyed themselves through nuclear stupidity? That was a different course, Lixner, but yes, Earth features prominently in many of our what not to do when becoming sentient curricula. Vorx pulled up a holographic display showing Earth spinning lazily. However, today we're focusing specifically on Earth's natural history from a xenopaleontological perspective. Drelb, a gaseous entity contained in a study suit, expanded curiously. Is this about the dinosaurs again? We get it. Big lizards. Humans love making movies about them. Asteroid goes boom. Very sad. Professor Vorx narrowed all 5 of his eyes. Your reductionist attitude is precisely why you're failing this class, Drelb. And for your information, we're going beyond the dinosaurs, way beyond. The professor's tentacle tapped the hologram, zooming out to show Earth's timeline stretching across the classroom. The class. What if I told you that Earth was once so alien that not even aliens would recognize it? That before dinosaurs stomped around making humans dance with excitement, Earth was a place that would make even a magma lava dweller think twice about vacation property. A murmur of genuine interest rippled through the classroom. That's right, Vorx continued, his skin shifting to an enthusiastic orange. Prehistoric Earth was a scientific wonderland of weirdness. And you're all about to see it firsthand because... He paused dramatically, all 3 of his mouths curling into smiles. I've arranged a special field trip to Earth's Natural History Museum. Teve, a crystalline being in the second row, vibrated with alarm. We're actually going to Earth. But Professor, isn't it dangerous? Don't they still have reality television? We'll be fine, Vorx dismissed with a wave of his tentacle. The museum is in a designated safe zone, and humans are quite accustomed to academic visitors through our exchange program. Besides, they think we're elaborate costumes worn by performance artists. But Professor, chirped Moz, a feathered reptilian, why bother going to a human museum? Surely our data archives have more accurate information than whatever primitive displays these humans have cobbled together. Professor Vorx's color darkened ominously, and Moz, that kind of species centrism is exactly why half of you would fail diplomatic relations 101. Sometimes, to truly understand a civilization, one must experience their perspective firsthand, no matter how adorably misguided it might be. He closed the hologram with a flourish. Prepare your observation appendages and translators. We depart at the 3rd chronon tomorrow, and please, for the love of all cosmic constants, do not attempt to correct the human guides. The last student who tried explaining quantum chronology to a human ended up in a viral video called Drunk Guy in Alien Costume Has Existential Meltdown at Museum Gift Shop. The university shuttle materialized in an alley behind the Earth's Natural History Museum with a subtle pop and a whiff of ozone. A shimmering field disguised it as a food truck selling something called artisanal fusion tacos, whatever those were. Remember your human appearance protocols, Professor Vorx hissed as he activated his own holographic disguise. The shimmer of light transformed him from a multi-limbed, color-shifting academic into a balding middle-aged man wearing an ill-fitting tweed jacket with leather elbow patches. Earth fashion is all about subtle discomfort and impracticality. The students followed suit, each activating their own disguise tech with varying degrees of success. Lixner became a tall woman with glasses and a pencil skirt, while Drelb's gaseous form coalesced into the appearance of a heavyset man with a camera around his neck and a t-shirt reading, I believe, and with a flying saucer beneath it. Drelb, that's a bit on the nose, don't you think? Vorx muttered. Yes. What? The database said this was appropriate tourist attire. Moss had transformed into what appeared to be a teenager with blue hair and multiple piercings. I've selected the rebellious youth appearance to avoid conversation with adults, she explained proudly. Excellent strategy. Vorx nodded. Now remember, we're just a normal human educational group. The museum staff have been told we're from, where was it again? In Nebraska. Apparently it's so forgettable that even humans don't question people from there. The professor led his disguised students through the service entrance where a human waited, bouncing excitedly on his heels. He was tall and lanky with wild grey-streaked hair and wore a lab coat covered in dinosaur pins and patches. Welcome, welcome. The man's voice boomed with unexpected volume. I'm Dr. Jack Fenway, head paleobiologist and your guide for today's special tour. You must be the Nebraska Community College group. Professor Vorx extended a hand in the traditional human greeting gesture, carefully maintaining exactly 5 fingers. Yes, indeed. I am Professor Sir Smith. These are my students. Wonderful to meet you all. We don't get many groups interested specifically in pre-dinosaur Earth. Usually everyone just wants to see the T-Rex. Dr. Fenway's enthusiasm was almost alarming. But the really cool stuff happened billions of years before those overgrown lizards. That's where the real mysteries are. Teve leaned toward Lixner and whispered, Is he malfunctioning? His energy levels seem dangerously high. I think it's just how some humans operate, Lixner whispered back. Their documentation mentions something called coffee that induces this state. Dr. Fenway led them through a staff corridor, swiping his badge at several doors. So, Nebraska, huh? Don't get many academic groups from there. What's your area of focus? Vorx cleared his throat. We are particularly interested in Earth's most primitive periods, before the dinosaurs. Our students are quite fascinated by how simple life was back then. Fenway stopped walking and turned, his eyes suddenly gleaming with an intensity that made even Vorx uncomfortable. Simple? Simple. The human laughed, a sound not unlike the mating call of a Regalian spine beast. Oh, Professor Smith, that's where everyone gets it wrong. What happened before the dinosaurs wasn't simple at all, it was revolutionary, chaotic and absolutely mind-blowing. I'm sure it was very impressive. For Earth, Moz offered condescendingly through her teenage disguise. Dr. Fenway's smile widened. You have no idea what you're about to see, do you? He pushed open a final door, revealing an enormous darkened gallery. With a flourish he pressed a button, and lighting gradually illuminated a vast chamber filled with strange displays, holographic reconstructions, and massive timeline walls. Welcome, he announced with theatrical grandeur, to before the beginning, Earth's first 4 billion years. I promise you, by the end of this tour, you'll never look at this simple little planet the same way again. The alien students exchanged glances, a mixture of confusion and reluctant curiosity settling over the group as they followed the bouncing human into the darkened gallery. Dr. Fenway strode forward, waving his arms enthusiastically as the first display lit up a swirling holographic representation of cosmic dust and gas. So we begin at the very beginning. About 4.6 billion years ago, this little corner of our galaxy was just a boring cloud of cosmic debris, until the hologram collapsed dramatically into a spinning disk with a bright center, a gravitational collapse. Our sun forms at the center, and the remaining materials begin to accrete into planets. Basic planetary formation, Drelb whispered to Teve. Even Glorbian younglings know this. Dr. Fenway continued, oblivious to the alien commentary. Now here's where it gets wild. Early Earth wasn't the blue marble we know today. It was a hellscape molten rock, constant asteroid bombardment, no atmosphere worth mentioning, and temperatures that would melt your face clean off. The display shifted to show a glowing, angry-looking planet. Fascinating, Professor Vorx remarked dryly. Your primitive planet was once more primitive. Fenway didn't seem to notice the condescension. But here's the kicker: about 4.5 billion years ago, a Mars-sized object slammed into proto-Earth. The hologram showed a massive collision, debris spraying outward in slow motion. We call this hypothetical planet theory. The impact was so catastrophic that it literally ripped material from both planets and flung it into orbit, eventually forming our moon. Fenway pointed to a smaller display showing the lunar formation process. Without this completely random cosmic accident, Earth would have developed very differently: no tides to drive coastal evolution, no stabilized axis to give us seasons, no romantic moonlit walks for awkward first dates. Seth, a quiet student who resembled a humanoid octopus in their natural form, stepped closer to the display. You determined all this without extraplanetary observation capabilities. How? By isotopic analysis, computer modeling, and lunar samples, Fenway replied. The Moon and Earth share identical oxygen isotope ratios, which strongly suggests they formed from the same material. We figured this out decades before we even sent humans to Mars. Vorx coughed loudly. Very impressive guesswork. Shall we continue? Of course. Fenway led them deeper into the exhibition, past a bubbling vat of primordial chemical soup. Now we're looking at Earth about 4 billion years ago, still no multicellular life, but we've got organic compounds forming in the oceans. The building blocks of life, cooking away in a planet-sized pot of hot, toxic water under an atmosphere of mostly nitrogen, carbon dioxide, and water vapor. Lixner raised a hand. But where did these compounds come from? Great question. Fenway beamed. Some were likely delivered by comets and meteorites, others formed right here through chemical reactions energized by lightning, UV radiation, and hydrothermal vents. This is the famous primordial soup hypothesis, though there are competing theories involving deep sea vents or clay substrates. The display shifted to show microscopic structures, and then, around 3.5 billion years ago, boom. Well, not literally boom, more like a very quiet, microscopic tada. The first cells appear. Moz snorted. Single-celled organisms, how thrilling. Fenway turned, his eyes gleaming with unexpected intensity. You bet your blue hair it's thrilling. These weren't just any cells, these were the OGs, the pioneers, the first life we know of anywhere in the universe. Stromatolites, microbial mats, and eventually cyanobacteria, which performed the first and most significant terraforming project in Earth's history. Terraforming? T vibrated curiously. These primitive organisms altered their planet? Absolutely. Fenway slapped a button, and the display shifted to show the Earth slowly changing color from reddish-brown to blue and green. Cyanobacteria pumped oxygen into our atmosphere for hundreds of millions of years, essentially poisoning most existing anaerobic life in what we call the Great Oxygenation Event. It was the first global extinction, caused by oxygen pollution. Professor Vorx blinked all 5 of his holographically hidden eyes. You mean to tell us that primitive bacterial life forms changed the fundamental atmospheric composition of your entire planet? You're damn right they did. Fenway nodded vigorously, and that was just the beginning. The tour continued through a winding corridor where the walls displayed a continuous timeline. Dr. Fenway gestured expansively as they walked. So after oxygen became abundant, complex life became possible. But it wasn't immediate. We're talking about a waiting period longer than the time between dinosaurs and humans. Finally, about 600 million years ago, the Cambrian explosion happened. The next room bloomed around them with strange holographic creatures swimming through the air, bizarre arthropods with multiple limbs, worm-like creatures with fearsome mandibles, and bulbous things that defied easy classification. Meet your evolutionary ancestors, Fenway declared proudly. Well, sort of. Many of these lineages died out, but some evolved into everything we see today. Zeph had fallen behind the group, drawn to a small touchscreen interface labeled Research Database, Staff Only. While the others gaped at the Cambrian holograms, Zeph's fingers, carefully maintaining their human appearance, hovered over the screen. "Just a quick peek," Zeph muttered, glancing to ensure Vorx wasn't watching. A lifetime of academic curiosity won out over protocol as Zeph's finger tapped the screen. The interface flashed, voice authorization required. Zeph froze, expecting alarms. Instead, Dr. Fenway's booming voice echoed from nearby, and these five-eyed creatures were called a Bobinia, definitely one of my favorites. The computer dinged cheerfully. Voice recognized. "Welcome, Dr. Fenway." The screen flashed to life, revealing a database far more extensive than Zeph had anticipated. Not just museum exhibits, but raw research data, radiometric dating results, genomic sequencing of ancient microbes, gravitational models of early solar system formation, and dissertation papers with titles like Quantum Chronological Analysis of Precambrian Fossil Records. "This can't be right," Zeph whispered, scrolling faster. According to galactic classification, Earth was a Category 3 emerging civilization, barely unified, their science still primitive. Yet here was evidence of understanding that approached Category 1 levels in specialized areas. "Hey, what are you doing back there?" Zeph jumped guiltily, expecting to see Professor Vorx. Instead, it was Lixner, the insectoid student. "You need to see this," Zeph whispered urgently. "These humans, they're not as primitive as we've been taught." Lixner's human disguise frowned skeptically but joined Zeph at the terminal. "What do you mean?" "Look at these research papers. Their understanding of evolutionary genomics, planetary formation, even the mathematical models they're using to reconstruct extinct ecosystems. It's advanced." Lixner's eyes widened as she scrolled through the database. "This paper on extremophile bacteria is citing research techniques we only developed 2 centuries ago in galactic standard time. How are they?" "Ah, I see you found our research database." Dr. Fenway's voice made them both jump. He stood behind them, grinning widely rather than showing the anger they expected. "Curious about the deeper science, are you? Excellent. Most visitors just want to see the flashy displays. We were just..." Zeph began. "No need to explain. Curiosity is what drives science forward." Fenway tapped the screen, bringing up a complex 3D model of DNA reconstruction from fossilized microbes. "This is my colleague's work on extracting genetic material from 3-billion-year-old stromatolites. Evolutionary stuff. We can track genetic drift across billions of years." Professor Vorx had noticed the separation and hurried over, his human disguise looking somewhat strained from alarm. "Ah, there you are. We should rejoin the group for the EAR. Simple explanations appropriate for our educational level." "Nonsense." Fenway clapped Vorx on the shoulder. "Your students here have found our research section. I was just about to show them how we've managed to reconstruct the entire genome of several extinct early life forms. Did you know we've even successfully reactivated genes from organisms that haven't existed for over 2 billion years? Vorx's face paled. "You've done what now?" "Oh yes," Fenway continued cheerfully, "we've made tremendous breakthroughs in paleogenomics. Some researchers even suggest we might eventually understand how life first emerged on Earth, and possibly allowing us to recreate the process from scratch under laboratory conditions." Zeph and Lixner exchanged alarmed glances as Professor Vorx's human disguise flickered momentarily from shock. Vorx attempted to regain his composure, his holographic disguise stabilizing. "Dr. Fenway, perhaps we should continue with the standard tour. These students aren't prepared for advanced research concepts." Fenway's eyebrows raised slightly. "Really? They seem quite engaged to me. Especially these two." He gestured toward Zeph and Lixner. "In fact, they asked some questions that remind me of perspectives I've heard from, shall we say, visiting scholars from very distant institutions." An uncomfortable silence fell over the small group. The rest of the class had wandered ahead into the next exhibition hall, leaving just Vorx, Zeph, Lixner, and the unusually perceptive Dr. Fenway. "I don't know what you're implying," Vorx said stiffly. Fenway leaned against the wall, arms crossed, a knowing smile playing at his lips. Professor Smith, I've been giving these tours for 20 years. I've seen more educational groups from Nebraska with unusual knowledge gaps and occasional disguise glitches than you might expect. He winked. Your holo projection technology has improved since last year, though. The elbow patches are a nice touch. Vorx's mouth opened and closed silently. Don't worry, Fenway continued casually. We have an understanding with your exchange program. But I do get tired of the condescension. Simple life forms, primitive planet, basic understanding. They've heard it all before. Over. Zeph stepped forward. You knew we weren't human? This whole time? Let's just say I had my suspicions when your friend there. He pointed to Drelb in the distance, whose gaseous form was causing his human disguise to appear slightly fuzzy around the edges. Walked through the metal detector without setting it off despite wearing what appears to be several pounds of camera equipment. Lixner chittered nervously before catching herself. But if you knew, why not say something? Because that's not how the game is played, Fenway replied. Besides, I enjoy watching the moment when visitors like you realize that humans might understand a bit more about the universe than you've been led to believe. Vorx finally recovered his voice. This is outrageous. You've been manipulating us. No more than you've been manipulating my species' perception in the galactic community, Fenway countered smoothly. Tell me, Professor, what classification is Earth given in your academic systems? Emerging civilization? Primitive technology base, quaint but underdeveloped. That's classified information, Vorx sputtered. And yet, here we are, Fenway gestured to the database, still displaying advanced research, reconstructing billion-year-old genomes, modeling quantum interactions in early chemical processes, and developing theories about planetary formation that your students seem quite surprised by. Zeph couldn't contain the question any longer. How did humans advance this far without being noticed? Our monitoring systems are looking for the wrong signatures, Fenway finished. You're watching for antimatter engines and faster-than-light travel. Meanwhile, we've been diving into the fundamental nature of life itself. He tapped the screen. Did you know that several of the research papers in this database were co-authored by what you might call independent researchers who weren't formally affiliated with any Earth institution? Vorx's eyes widened. You're working with rogue scientists from other worlds. I prefer to call it unofficial academic exchange, Fenway grinned. While the official galactic community dismisses us as barely worth studying, there are plenty of individual researchers across the stars who recognize potential when they see it. Lixner turned to Vorx accusingly. Professor, did you know about this? Have we been taught deliberate misinformation about Earth's scientific advancement? Vorx's color-changing skin was beginning to show through his disguise in patches of agitated purple. Of course not. This must be some kind of human exaggeration. Is it? Fenway raised an eyebrow, tapping a few more commands into the terminal. A holographic display materialized, showing Earth's complete evolutionary timeline in extraordinary detail. Then perhaps you'd care to explain how such a primitive civilization managed to reconstruct billions of years of evolutionary history with such precision that it matches your own galactic records? Records, I might add, that you've never shared with us. The rest of the alien students had noticed the commotion and drifted back, forming a curious circle around the confrontation. Drelb's gaseous form was causing his human disguise to flicker noticeably. What's happening? Teve asked, crystalline structure vibrating with anxiety beneath her human appearance. Dr. Fenway knows what we are, Lixner announced. And apparently humans are much more scientifically advanced than we've been taught. Moss scoffed. That's ridiculous. Next you'll tell us they've achieved quantum entanglement communication. Actually, Fenway interjected with a casual tone that somehow made it worse. We demonstrated that particular technology about 15 years ago. We just don't advertise it much. Keeps the cosmic neighbors from getting nervous. Professor Vorx's disguise was now fluctuating wildly as his emotional control slipped. This is absurd. Earth is categorized as a Category 3 civilization. Your species barely achieved unified planetary governance. Ah, but that's where everyone gets it wrong, Fenway walked to a small control panel and pressed a sequence of buttons. The lights dimmed, and a hidden door slid open in the wall. Political unity isn't the same as scientific advancement. While our governments bicker, our scientists collaborate. He led the stunned group through the doorway into a smaller, circular room with a central holographic display. This exhibit isn't on the public tour. We call it the perspective room. With a wave of his hand, the display activated, showing the familiar spiral of the Milky Way galaxy. For most of human history, we thought we were the center of everything. Earth was fixed, unmovable, with the sun and stars revolving around us. The display shifted, showing ancient Earth-centric models of the cosmos. Then we realized we orbit the sun. The model updated to a heliocentric system. Then that our sun is just one of billions in the Milky Way. The view zoomed out, showing countless stars. Then that our galaxy is just one of billions in the observable universe. The view expanded to show the cosmic web of galaxies. Each time, we've had to confront the humbling reality that we're smaller and less significant than we thought. Fenway looked directly at Vorx. So you can imagine that we wouldn't be particularly surprised to learn we're not alone in the universe. The hologram shifted again, now showing what was unmistakably a map of galactic civilizations, one that the alien students recognized with shock. You have the complete galactic index. Vorx gasped, his disguise now completely forgotten, his true form visible to all. Let's just say we have friends in high places, Fenway replied with a wink. Or more accurately, friends who think the galactic classification system could use some updating. SF moved closer to the display. But why keep humanity's advancements secret from the galactic community? It wasn't our idea, Fenway said. Apparently, civilizations develop more naturally when left to their own devices, rather than being prematurely introduced to the galactic stage. At least, that's what our unofficial colleagues tell us. He turned to address the entire class. Think about what you've learned today. Not just about Earth's prehistoric life, but about assumptions. You came expecting to find a primitive planet with rudimentary understanding of its own history. Instead, you found a species that's reconstructed billions of years of evolution, and modeled planetary formation in detail, and perhaps most importantly, he grinned at their astonished faces, figured out your little visitation program years ago. 2 days later, Professor Vorx stood nervously before the university dean's holographic projection. The dean's 7 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of deep irritation. So let me understand this correctly. The dean rumbled. Not only did you allow your students to be identified as non-terrestrials, but you've returned with a petition signed by every student in your class demanding a complete curriculum revision regarding Earth's scientific classification. Yes, Dean, Vorx mumbled. And there's more. 3 students have already applied for exchange programs with Earth universities. Apparently, Dr. Fenway offered to pull some strings. The dean's appendages wiggled in frustration. This is precisely why Earth was kept at Category 3. Their curiosity is infectious. Before you know it, half the galaxy will be obsessed with dinosaurs and primordial ooze. Vorx couldn't help but smile slightly. With all due respect, Dean, perhaps it's time we learned a bit more from the humans. After all, any species that can piece together 4 billion years of history from rocks and fossils might have something to teach even us.